He thought he'd won $600 million, a new life, and no wife. But during the will reading, the lawyer leaned forward and asked, "Did you even read this?" That's when my husband's empire began to crumble. So before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, smash that like button, and tell me in the comments if you've ever dreamed of seeing someone get exactly what they deserve, because that's exactly what you're about to witness. I never thought betrayal had a sound, but that night I heard it clearly. The sharp slap of papers hitting the glass coffee table, followed by the smug inhale of the man I once called my husband. "Sign them, Vanessa," Marcus said, his voice carrying that sickening mix of arrogance and glee. "Let's stop pretending this is anything more than it ever was." I stared at the stack of divorce papers as though they were a snake ready to strike. My heart thudded so hard it rattled in my chest, but on the outside, I didn't move. My fingers dug into the fabric of the sofa, nails biting down as if anchoring me in place. The lamp beside me threw a soft glow over the room, mocking the heaviness in the air. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Divorce? Tonight? After your father's funeral?" He smirked, settling back into the leather armchair like a king granting decrees. His expensive cologne clung to the air, suffocating, as though he drenched himself in it to mask the rot underneath. "Don't act surprised, Vanessa. You knew this was coming. We've been finished for a while. I just didn't need to rush until now." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand. The funeral replayed in my head. Black suits, whispered condolences, the heavy casket lowered into the earth. Richard Carter, my father-in-law, had been the one steady light in this family, and now, barely 24 hours after burying him, his son was already circling like a vulture. I whispered, "Your father isn't even cold in the ground." He leaned forward, his smile sharp and cruel. "And he left me everything. That company, those accounts, the houses, mine. Finally. I don't need you anymore. You were, let's say, a stepping stone, a decent placeholder until I got what I was owed." The words pierced like glass shards, each syllable cutting deeper. My chest tightened, a heat rising from the pit of my stomach. He didn't even flinch saying it. No shame, no hesitation, just a blunt declaration that I had been nothing but furniture in his carefully staged life. I wanted to scream, to throw the crystal vase on the mantel at his smug face, to claw at him until he bled for every ounce of dignity he had stolen from me. Instead, I sat frozen, the battle raging inside my body while my mind repeated one sentence over and over: "Don't let him see you break." Marcus misread my silence as defeat. He chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. "Come on, Vanessa. Don't look at me like that. You'll land on your feet. You always do. But me? I've got bigger plans, and dragging you around doesn't fit the picture anymore." I finally forced myself to look up. His eyes were cold, empty, the same eyes that once convinced me he was exciting, passionate, different from the grief that had swallowed my life years ago. Now I saw them for what they were: shallow pools reflecting nothing but his own greed. My hand reached for the pen he had tossed carelessly onto the table. It felt heavy between my fingers. The tip hovered over the page, trembling as though it too resisted what was being asked of it. "I gave you my time, my trust, my savings," I whispered, my voice cracking despite my effort to steady it. "And this is how you repay me?" Marcus shrugged, utterly unmoved. "You gave me what I needed. That's all." My stomach lurched. I remembered late nights when I covered bills because he had forgotten to manage his accounts. The loans he begged me to co-sign, the sacrifices I made, cutting down my hours of rest just to take extra projects so his lifestyle wouldn't collapse. And now, with one shrug, he erased it all. Tears burned the edges of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. With a deep breath, I pressed the pen to the paper and scrawled my name. Each letter felt like carving out a piece of myself, but I did it. Slowly, calmly. When I finished, I pushed the papers back to him. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. There. File them yourself. For a brief moment, Marcus's smirk faltered. He had expected a fight, maybe even a desperate plea. Instead, I handed him cold indifference, the one weapon I still had. I stood, grabbed my coat from the hook by the door, and walked past him. My legs felt like lead, but they carried me forward anyway. As I reached the door, he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You'll regret this, Vanessa. You'll see. I'll be living the life you only dreamed of." I didn't turn around, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my face. I opened the door, stepped into the cool night air, and let it slam shut behind me. Grief is a strange companion. It doesn't knock politely or ask permission to stay. It barges in, spreads its heavy presence, and dares you to keep breathing. I learned that the year Ethan died. Ethan was my first love, my steady hand in the chaos of my 20s. He wasn't flashy or reckless, just dependable. His laugh could soften my worst days, and his arms were always warm with promises he'd never failed to keep. But cancer doesn't care about promises. It stripped him from me piece by piece until one morning I woke up next to an empty side of the bed and realized forever was shorter than I thought. The months after his death blurred together in shades of gray. Work became my only refuge. Friends drifted away when they realized grief isn't cured by a night out or cheap wine. I wore black even when I didn't have to, as if the color itself shielded me from having to pretend I was okay. And then, one evening, Marcus appeared. It was at a fundraiser dinner, one of those events filled with clinking glasses, polite laughter, and people smiling too wide to hide their hunger for wealth and connections. I hadn't wanted to go, but my boss insisted. I was standing awkwardly by the buffet, holding a glass of wine I didn't want, when Marcus approached. "Why does someone like you look like they'd rather be anywhere else?" he asked, his grin bold and disarming. I turned, startled. He was striking. Dark hair slicked back, jaw sharp, suit tailored to perfection. There was a gleam in his eyes, a confidence I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. "Maybe because I would rather be anywhere else," I muttered. He laughed, low and warm, like we shared a secret. "Then let's change that. Dance with me." Before I could refuse, his hand was already extended, palm open, daring me to take it. And I did. That night, Marcus spun me across the dance floor with ease, making me feel, for the first time since Ethan's death, like life might hold something other than sorrow. He made me laugh. He listened, at least he seemed to. And when he looked at me, it was as if the weight I carried wasn't so visible anymore. Over the weeks that followed, he pursued me with relentless charm. Flowers at my office, dinners at restaurants I could never afford, weekend trips where he whisked me away from reality. Every gesture chipped away at the fortress of grief I had built. Friends cautioned me, "It's too fast, Vanessa, you're still healing." But I didn't want to hear it. I craved escape, and Marcus was a storm that pulled me out of still waters. When he introduced me to his father, Richard Carter, I was nervous. Richard wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful. His reputation in business circles was that of a man who built empires from dust, a legend who commanded respect the way some men command armies. To my surprise, Richard welcomed me warmly. "Any woman who can stand beside my son deserves a medal," he teased, shaking my hand firmly, but his eyes lingered on me with something deeper. Recognition, maybe even approval. Over time, Richard became more of a father to me than Marcus ever was a husband. He asked about my career, my dreams, even my late husband. He never dismissed my grief. Instead, he respected it, as though he knew loss in his own way. I didn't notice it then, but Richard's acceptance was part of Marcus's performance. He thrived on appearances, and with me at his side, he looked grounded, responsible, even noble. What I didn't know was that behind the polished surface, Marcus was already calculating how to turn love into leverage. If Marcus was the storm, Richard was the anchor. Every Sunday, Richard would invite us to his mansion on the hill, a sprawling estate with marble floors and ceilings so high they seemed to scrape the sky. Marcus liked to show it off, walking through the halls with his chest puffed out like he owned the place, but Richard carried himself differently. He never bragged. He didn't have to. His presence filled the room more than the chandeliers or the artwork ever could. I often found myself drifting toward him during those visits, not out of obligation, but because he had a way of making me feel seen. He asked about my work projects, remembered details I barely mentioned, and told me stories about his early days, how he'd once lived in a cramped apartment while building Carter Holdings from scratch. "You see, Vanessa," he said one evening while we sat on the veranda, sipping tea as the sun dipped into the horizon, "money means nothing if you don't know who you are without it. A man who builds his worth on a bank account alone is no man at all." At the time, I thought he was just sharing wisdom. Only later did I realize those words were a quiet warning about his own son. Marcus never had patience for Richard's stories. He'd roll his eyes, mutter excuses, and disappear into the house to make phone calls or scroll through his phone. At first, I chalked it up to the usual father-son tension, but the longer I watched, the more I saw it. The simmering resentment, the hunger in Marcus's eyes when he looked at his father's empire. He didn't see legacy. He saw entitlement. It showed in the little things. At dinners, Marcus would boast about what he'd do once Dad steps aside. He'd make lists of cars he wanted, properties he planned to acquire, investments he'd flip. It was all about taking, never building. "Marcus," Richard said one evening, his tone sharp, "you talk as if you've already earned it. What have you created? What risk have you taken?" Marcus laughed dismissively, waving him off. "I don't need to reinvent the wheel, Dad. You've already done the work. I just have to step in and enjoy it." Richard's eyes flickered to me then, and for a fleeting second, I saw pain there. Deep, quiet disappointment. After dinner that night, as Marcus left to meet friends, Richard stopped me at the door. His voice was low, almost weary. "You're a good woman, Vanessa. Stronger than you realize. I hope you never let Marcus's weaknesses become your burden." I didn't know how to respond. His words lodged themselves in my mind, echoing long after we drove home. At first, I thought Richard simply disapproved of Marcus's lack of discipline. But as time passed, I began to see what Richard already knew. Marcus's appetite was endless. He bought things we didn't need with money we didn't have. Watches, designer suits, trips to Europe, all charged to credit cards I eventually had to cover. When I asked him to slow down, he'd snap. "Why do you care? My father's money will cover everything soon. Stop stressing about pocket change." Pocket change. The charges weren't small. They were astronomical. $5,000 here for a watch. $10,000 there for a weekend in Monaco with his friends. I worked myself to exhaustion just to balance our accounts while he lived like he had already inherited the Carter fortune. But money wasn't the only problem. Marcus grew restless, moody. The charm that once dazzled me turned sharp, cutting in places I never thought he'd aim for. "You've let yourself go," he muttered once, when I came home late from work, too tired to do more than change into sweatpants. "Richard's colleagues think I married a secretary, not a wife." The words sliced through me, but I bit down on my tongue. I told myself he didn't mean it, that he was under pressure, but the truth was harder to swallow. Marcus thrived on control, and when he felt powerless, he turned his claws on me. Richard noticed. One evening, after another tense dinner, he pulled me aside in his study. The room smelled of leather and old books, a sanctuary from the storm Marcus carried everywhere. Richard closed the door, his face heavy with something unspoken. "Vanessa," he said softly, "tell me honestly, how are you doing?" I hesitated. Years of conditioning had taught me to cover the bruises that weren't visible, to paste on a smile and say, "I'm fine." But something about Richard's gaze, steady, unflinching, stripped me of that pretense. "I don't know anymore," I whispered. My throat tightened. "Sometimes I feel like I don't even recognize him." Richard leaned back, sighing deeply. "Marcus, he has always struggled with entitlement. I gave him too much too soon. And now, I fear he's lost the discipline needed to carry the Carter name." For a moment, silence hung between us. Then, almost reluctantly, Richard spoke again. "I haven't shared this with anyone, not even Marcus, but I need you to know, when the time comes, everything I've built will not go to him outright. I've made provisions, safeguards. My legacy must be preserved, not squandered." I stared at him, stunned. "You mean you're not leaving it to Marcus?" Richard shook his head slowly. "Not directly. He'll receive something, of course, but the bulk will be protected, placed where it cannot be wasted on ego or greed." His eyes softened. "You'll understand why." My pulse quickened. The implication was clear. Richard saw me differently than he saw Marcus, not as a liability, but as someone who could be trusted. The weight of that responsibility both humbled and frightened me. When Marcus barged into the room minutes later, demanding we leave, I tucked Richard's secret away, unsure of what it meant for me or for the storm I was living in. But the cracks widened. Marcus's outbursts became more frequent. He'd slam doors, shout about imagined slights, accuse me of not supporting him. At parties, he drank too much, bragging about his future empire, while others exchanged awkward glances. Behind his back, I heard whispers, businessmen doubting his competence, friends mocking his arrogance. The man who had once swept me off my feet was unraveling before my eyes. And yet I stayed. Why? Perhaps it was stubborn hope. Or maybe it was fear. Fear that leaving would prove him right when he called me ungrateful, small, replaceable. Still, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Richard's time was limited. His health, once robust, seemed to falter. He grew thinner, slower, his cough lingering longer with each passing week. Marcus noticed, too. But for him, it wasn't concern I saw in his eyes. It was anticipation. "Don't you see?" he whispered one night, clutching my wrist a little too tightly. "When Dad goes, it all becomes mine. And then Vanessa will finally live the life we deserve." The call came on a gray morning, the kind where the sky feels too heavy to hold. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed with Richard's attorney's name. Before I answered, I already knew. "Mrs. Carter," the voice said gently, "I'm afraid Richard passed away last night in his sleep." My hands trembled. The mug slipped, shattering against the floor. For a moment, all I heard was the sound of my own pulse, deafening in my ears. Richard was gone, the one steady presence, a man who had given me kindness when Marcus gave me cruelty. When I told Marcus, his reaction was not grief. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close enough to twist my stomach. So, it's finally happened, he said, pouring himself a drink before noon. The empire is mine. I stared at him, stunned. Marcus, your father just died. He waved dismissively, sipping his whiskey. Don't be naive, Vanessa. Dad loved a long life. This was inevitable. Now it's time for us to step into our future. Our future. The words tasted bitter. He wasn't mourning, he was celebrating. The days that followed blurred together. The funeral, the condolences, the endless stream of people who came not for Richard, but for the spectacle of his passing. Marcus basked in it, shaking hands, making promises he had no right to make. He strutted through the house as though the walls already bore his name. But I couldn't shake Richard's secret. His quiet confession in the study echoed louder with each passing day. My legacy must be preserved, not squandered. I didn't know the full details, but I knew enough. Marcus was in for a rude awakening. And I thought, foolishly, that when the truth came, I'd be there to witness his fall. But Marcus had other plans. 2 weeks after the funeral, I came home to find him sitting at the dining table, a stack of papers neatly arranged in front of him. His expression was cold, calculated, like a lawyer delivering a sentence. "What's this?" I asked, my voice wary. "Divorce papers." The words knocked the air from my lungs. "Divorce? You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It's time we stop pretending. You've served your purpose, Vanessa, but you're not part of the life I'm building. I need someone who fits the image, someone worthy of the Carter name." I gripped the back of a chair, my knuckles white. "After everything? After I stood by you? After I carried us through your debts and tantrums? You throw me away like this?" His smirk was cruel. "Don't make it sound so tragic. You'll get a settlement, a generous one if you sign quietly. But don't think for a second you'll be standing beside me when I take over." I wanted to scream, to hurl the papers in his face, but my body betrayed me, trembling with shock. The betrayal wasn't just in his words, it was in his timing. Richard's grave was still fresh in the earth, and Marcus was already cutting me out of the picture. That night, I locked myself in the bedroom and cried until my throat was raw. Not just for the marriage that had crumbled into ash, but for the woman I used to be, the one who had believed in Marcus, who had loved him despite the warnings. I thought of Richard again, his hand on mine, his voice steady. Never let Marcus's weaknesses become your burden. And suddenly I understood. Richard had seen this ending long before I did. He knew Marcus would devour everything in his path, even me. The next morning, I signed the papers. Not because I accepted defeat, but because I realized something Marcus never had. Endings are only beginnings in disguise. When I slid the documents across the table, Marcus grinned, victorious. He thought he had won, that I had surrendered. But as he tucked the papers away, I caught the faintest flicker in his eyes, a glimmer of greed so blinding, so consuming, that I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I didn't have to wait long for the storm to break. Richard's will was read on a humid afternoon inside his lawyer's office. The room was polished, silent, heavy with anticipation. Marcus strutted in wearing a tailored suit he could barely afford, his smile cocky, his chin high, as if the crown was already placed on his head. I sat quietly in the back, my heart steady, remembering Richard's whispered words. "I've made provisions, safeguards." The attorney cleared his throat, his voice calm, deliberate. "By order of the late Mr. Richard Carter, his estate, assets, and business holdings will be placed in a trust to be managed according to his wishes." Marcus shifted, frowning. "A trust? What do you mean? I'm his son. I'm his heir." The attorney continued, unfazed. Mr. Carter specified that the majority of his assets be secured under professional management. Marcus Carter will receive a modest annual stipend contingent on meeting certain behavioral requirements. A silence stretched across the room. Marcus blinked, confused. Stipend? Requirements? His voice rose, strained. That's impossible. I'm entitled to everything. He promised me. The lawyer's gaze didn't waver. Your father's instructions were explicit. His legacy is to be preserved, not squandered. I could see it then. The precise moment Marcus's arrogance cracked. His cheeks flushed red, his jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed in his neck. This is a mistake, he barked, slamming his fist on the desk. You can't do this. He can't do this to me. The attorney folded his hands neatly. He already has. Marcus turned to me then, his eyes wild, searching for an ally, but I only stared back, calm, detached. His empire, his fantasy life, it was dissolving right in front of him, and there was nothing I could do but watch. Nothing I wanted to do. When we left the office, Marcus was shaking. That old man betrayed me, he hissed, pacing the sidewalk. He gave you more respect than his own son, didn't he? Tell me, Vanessa, what did you know? I met his glare with silence. Let him stew. Let him wonder. His paranoia was punishment enough. Days turned to weeks, and Marcus's downfall spread like fire. Creditors came knocking, their smiles gone, their hands outstretched. Even women who once clung to him began to slip away, chasing brighter prospects. The once proud Marcus Carter became a ghost of himself, shouting at bartenders when his card declined, begging old acquaintances for loans. The arrogance didn't fade, it curdled into desperation. And through it all, he kept calling me. Vanessa, you don't understand. You're supposed to be with me. You're supposed to stand by me. I let the calls go unanswered. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. I drove past the old penthouse we once shared. The lights were off. The doorman was gone. A for sale sign hung in the lobby window. I parked across the street, watching as Marcus stumbled out of the building, his once pristine suit wrinkled and stained. He looked older, weaker, his swagger reduced to a shuffle. For a brief moment, pity tugged at me. This was a man that I had once loved, once believed in. But the memory of his smirk as he slid those divorce papers across the table hardened me again. He had made his choice. I whispered to myself, You did this, Marcus. Not me. You. The city moved on without him. Deals were made, fortunes shifted, and Marcus Carter, once the golden heir, became nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and cocktail parties. And me? I was free. If that twist left you speechless, imagine how satisfying it felt to watch karma serve justice in real life. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who loves seeing the tables turn. And tell me in the comments, have you ever dreamed of justice this sweet?